Well, tonight we're going to hear this from the perspective of the president of Russell-Marti Conservation Services, Marianne Russell Marti. Marianne has been in private conservation practice since 1988, and with Russell-Marti Conservation Services located in central Missouri. She holds an undergraduate degree in art history from Washington University in St. Louis, and an MA and Certificate of Advanced Study in Conservation from Buffalo State College. Marianne worked for 1 year in the Sculpture Conservation Department of the Victoria and Albert Museum in London when she was in her 3rd year internship. After receiving her degree in 1987, she and her husband Bob Marti started their conservation practice, specializing in decorative arts and sculpture in all medium, with a focus on bronze. Excuse me. They have been the principal conservators for the Martin H. Bush Outdoor Sculpture Collection here at Wichita State for many, many years. I say late 1990s, does that sound right? Yeah, late 1990s. So we're coming up on their 20th anniversary in their association with us here. I'm sure when they first started here, they never expected that 5 years of their life would be tied up in conserving what is certainly the greatest work of public art in Kansas. I would argue one of the greatest works of public art in the United States. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Marianne Russell Marti.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here on the culmination of this 9-year project. And tonight I'm going to share with you our journey through the entire process of conserving WSU's amazing Miro mosaic mural, Personnages, Oiseaux, or bird people. Before launching into the Mosaic project, I'll first briefly discuss my company's relationship with the Mosaic and the other art here on campus. Our firm, as Bob said already, Russell-Marti Conservation Services, specializes in art conservation with a focus on outdoor sculpture. Art conservation is the profession charged with preserving cultural property, or in other words, we take care of the physical needs of works of art or items of cultural or historical significance. We've been involved with taking care of WSU's wonderful outdoor sculpture collection since 1995. And in 1997, we began to carry out work on this mosaic. This was in an effort to stabilize an increasing loss of tiles, or tesserae as they're officially called. It's tessera for singular, tesserae plural. This ongoing relationship with the mural is what led to the full-scale treatment of the mosaic, which I'm going to describe over the course of the presentation. But first, we're going to go back in time to the 1970s to show you the beginnings of this amazing work of art. The mosaic, a unique work of art designed specifically for the exterior south-facing wall of the new Ulrich Museum, was conceived and realized by the museum's founding director, Dr. Martin H. Bush. Dr. Bush, who assembled the majority of this stellar outdoor sculpture collection, approached artist Joan Miro about designing a mosaic mural for the Ulrich Museum. The great Spanish artist, whose career spanned more than 50 years of the major artistic movements of the 20th century, became intrigued with making a work of art that would be enjoyed and appreciated on a college campus where young people would see it. And he agreed to make a painting that would be the design for the glass and marble mosaic. Miro titled the painting Personnages, Oiseaux, which roughly translates to bird people or bird characters. The artist stipulated that the construction of the mosaic be carried out by Atelier Loire in Chartres, France, which is a world-renowned stained glass art workshop. The artisans at Atelier Loire interpreted the paint on canvas, into colored glass and marble, greatly enlarging the painting and faithfully reproducing the vibrancy and immediacy of the painter's touch into materials that could be displayed outdoors. This image shows the artist at Atelier Loire while the mosaic was being made in 1977. It took several years to make it. I believe they started in the mid-70s and finished in 78. Miro was pleased and excited about the project. On June 29, 1977, Miro wrote, after seeing the mosaic partially completed, quote, "I believe it will be one of the best mosaics ever made. Because of the position of the pieces, they produce a beautiful sparkle, and the colors have a powerful light which let the graphic, or in other words, the impact of the original painting, keep all its vitality." After the mosaic was made in France, it was shipped to the United States, then traveled to Wichita, and was installed on the Ulrich Museum wall. The mosaic was unveiled in October 31st, 1978, and has since become an iconic piece of the artistic fabric at WSU and, of course, the city of Wichita. And as Bob says, it's a major piece in the country. The mosaic is among the largest two-dimensional works by Miro in North America, and it's the only one that the artist fabricated in glass and marble tesserae. WSU's Great Mosaic, besides its imagery being unique, is also unique and unorthodox in its construction. We'll first look at traditional mosaic construction. Mosaics are generally on masonry walls, and they're generally mounted with a cement and sand mortar. On a traditional mosaic, the mortar comes up almost completely around the tesserae. And even on a modern mosaic, the mortar still encapsulates much of the tesserae, or at the very least, it will come up to a minimum depth of about 1/4 inch. The modulus of elasticity, which is a substance's tendency to move or be deformed under stress, of a mosaic's composition, the mortar and the tesserae, would generally be compatible with the masonry wall's modulus of elasticity. So they're all going to move about at the same rate. The challenge for Atelier Loire was to make a mosaic of monumental proportions, approximately 26 feet high by 52 feet wide, make it in France, and then ship it nearly 4,700 miles to the United States. The logistics of making and moving something of this scale and installing it were potentially staggering. So Atelier Loire divided the mosaic into 80 separate sections, as shown here with grid lines made of string. I'm going to try to use, So there's a string tied across the painting to grid it into 80 sections. Creating the mural in individual sections solved the problem of making the mosaic in France, then shipping the sections to the United States. Each section or individual panel measures approximately 5 feet high by 3 feet wide. The panels that support each of the 80 divisions of the mosaic design were made of a marine-grade particle board with a marine varnish on the back. Because of the huge scale of the mosaic, the artisans chose to use large tesserae, glass and marble pieces, in order to give a life and vibrancy to the work that wouldn't have happened as easily if they'd used standard size tesserae. This image shows the variety of tesserae used in the mosaic, including white and gray marble, opaque mosaic glass called smalti, translucent slab glass called dalle de verre, and slate. The black fields of the design are actually made up of a number of different deep colors, including blues, reds, greens, purple, and amber. The mosaic glass for this mosaic was special ordered from Orsoni, one of the major mosaic glass companies in Venice. And it's much thicker than ordinary. It was special ordered to be about 15 millimeters in thickness. In another major departure from traditional mosaic construction, the tesserae on the WSU mosaic are mounted with an epoxy rather than a mortar, bulked with sand and fine crushed limestone, which gives the epoxy the appearance of a mortar. The use of epoxy on WSU's mosaic allowed the tesserae to be adhered with a minimum of material, and in some cases there's very little epoxy on the backs and very little around the tesserae. This actually allows light to interact more fully with each tessera and helps create that dazzling visual effect that Joan Miro so appreciated. Here's another view showing where a tessera fell off, and you could see just the very small amount of epoxy that was on the back. This amount was especially small, but many of them had just a teeny amount. When the WSU mosaic was made, these materials, that is the marine grade particle board and the use of epoxy, were considered to be cutting edge. And their use really did solve the problem of making the mosaic in France and shipping it to the US and having it installed here. In yet another departure from traditional mosaic construction, the mosaic panels are mounted on a steel framework secured several inches away from the concrete wall of the museum. The steel framework was anchored to the wall approximately every 6 feet. In the overall makeup of the WSU mosaic, we've got the concrete wall, the steel framework, particle board panels, epoxy, and the glass and marble tesserae. Now, all materials are going to move, expand and contract under different conditions and in different ways, depending on temperature and humidity. Add the stresses of the Kansas weather with extreme temperatures ranging from sub-zero to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, high winds, rain, snow, lightning and thunder, which causes vibrations across the panels, and the materials are going to move even more. Yet, they're all going to move differently, one from the other. The steel framework expands, contracts, and flexes at one rate, and the wood expands and contracts with moisture and dryness. The glass moves and the epoxy adhesive moves. Eventually, the epoxy deteriorated and became brittle and lost adhesion to the glass, and the result was a recipe for instability, or a very stressed mosaic. Former collections manager Mark Jansen estimates that between 300 and 400 tesserae would fall off the mural each year, especially more after a storm. This condition was frequently seen on the mosaic, where tesserae had become dislodged due to movement of the substrate. In many places, tesserae were just sitting there loose, having worked themselves forward, just waiting to fall with the right vibration. We also found that the epoxy itself had deteriorated. It had become brittle and would not flex with movement across the mosaic panels, resulting in tesserae falling. The presence of dirt on the back of this tessera shows that it had been loose for a long time. And in this image, we see a heavy dirt buildup in the place where the tessera was, as well as deteriorating and powdery epoxy, again indicating that this little piece was detached for a very long time. This image shows a crack radiating from one of the mounting screws that secured the panel to the steel framework. You can see that the crack goes right through an adhesive test of ours, showing that there was ongoing movement in the panels. In this case, the steel framework flexed, but the particle board didn't flex with it, and so it cracked. Another condition problem on the mosaic was the active deterioration of some of the yellow glass pieces in panels 62 and 67 in the very bright yellow field. These tesserae were literally self-destructing, cracking and disintegrating right on the wall. In addition, the glass and marble were dull and dirty. Besides accumulating a considerable amount of surface dirt, the glass tesserae were deteriorating slightly, resulting in this hazy appearance over the surface, which killed the original sparkle of the mural. Marble tesserae had surface dirt, ingrained dirt, and staining from the caulk used in between the panels. In some cases, spots of black mold were found growing on the surface. And finally, and this wasn't known to us initially, but over the course of our years of doing maintenance on the mosaic, of testing and in some cases removing different adhesives, we found that in some areas, the particle board support themselves were heavily deteriorated. In this image, you can see that when this section of epoxy was removed, it took a portion of the wood panel with it. And underneath, we found that the particle board was soft and spongy, a lot like pipe tobacco. And it was at this point that we realized that if the mosaic was to continue as a viable work of art in the location for which it was designed, then we were going to need to replace the panels themselves. And this understanding was reinforced further when we were able to remove one of the panels to examine the back. And along the lower edge of panel 62, you can see the swollen and degraded particle board where it had been moist for a long time. This is where the actual journey to conserve the mosaic begins. In 2007, more than 10 years after our first encounter with the mosaic, former museum director Dr. Patricia McDonald authorized a pilot study on the conservation of the mural. The pilot study would give us the opportunity to explore methods and materials for conserving the mosaic in order to ensure that it can continue to be displayed on the exterior south wall. In the pilot study, we were charged with finding treatment techniques and materials that would, one, maintain the integrity of the original mosaic. And this is one of the major tenets in the field of art conservation, that is always to maintain respect for the original, for the artist's touch as much as possible. So that meant that we would not want to rearrange the tesserae at all. And also we had to come up with ways to allow all the different components of the mosaic to move as they will in the outdoor environment while still holding together. So specifically, items we had to study in the pilot study, things we had to explore and resolve, were new backing panels. What materials would we use? We had to consider cost, fabrication techniques, ease of mounting, method of transfer. How would we transfer the mosaic design from the old panels to the new? Adhesive. What material would we use to stick down the mosaic onto the new panels? And facing material. How would we protect the mosaic during transfer from one panel to the other? How would we protect the glass and the marble? Cleaning. How would we safely clean the the glass and the marble tesserae? Future retreatability. This is a major aspect of art conservation, which is that we're always trying to think many years ahead to when a work of art is inevitably going to have to be treated again. And we have to carefully consider whether our current treatment materials are going to preclude any future treatment. And finally, reinstallation. We had to consider how we were going to reinstall the mosaic panels back on the wall. Over the course of the study, which was conducted by the three of us, actually, Bob Marti, myself, and Andy Breidenbach, we all worked as a threesome on this. We read, researched materials, experimented with materials on mock-ups that we made, you can see here. We consulted with other conservation professionals and with industry experts. Here's some of our facing tests. And in conjunction with the research and testing, the pilot study also involved the treatment of 3 panels, panels 62, 67, and 1, in order to allow us to develop actual treatment methods. We chose panels 62 and 67 because of the deteriorating yellow glass that actually had to be addressed. And panel 1 because it was a good example of a panel with a lot of marble tesserae. And also its loss from that corner of the mosaic wouldn't be too disruptive. Here's doing some actual treatment on panel 67. And finally, with the bulk of the research complete and 3 panels treated, we were able to write up the report of the pilot study along with a proposal for treatment of the entire mosaic. The 3-year study is documented in detail in a report that was submitted to the Ulrich Museum in 2010. This was reviewed and approved by the Ulrich Museum and 2 outside conservation professionals, and the project was formally underway in September of 2011. At last, the big day arrived when we began taking down the mosaic for treatment. On September 27th, 2011, to great fanfare and a wonderful public celebration, the first panel was removed. The remaining 76 mosaic panels were removed from the Ulrich over a 2-week period, working almost every day. Blue masking tape, which you can see here, was used to stabilize areas of fragile tesserae, ones that were about to come down, so that they wouldn't become dislodged and lost during the dismantling, storage, and transport of the mosaic. The dismantling was a team effort between Russell-Marti and the very able Ulrich staff of James Porter, Mark Jansen, and Joey Capadonna. The panels were taken to an off-site storage facility here in Wichita. Then, beginning in 2012, they were transported in batches to our workshop in central Missouri. And here's a quick look at the dismantling, a few sequence pictures here. And finally, the last panel was removed on October 12th, almost 5 years ago to the day. Also in 2011, we built a new workshop in order to have a large enough space to successfully carry out the conservation treatment of the mosaic. The next big day was April 5, 2012, when the first batch of 14 panels was brought from Wichita to our workshop in central Missouri. Over the next 4 years, we kept a relay going with the Ulrich. The museum would bring us new panels to work on and take back completed panels. This is the first delivery, and here Bob Marti, Andrew Shetler, James, and Andy are loading a panel onto one of the several tools, which you can actually see it, this one here as well, which we either purchased or had built to help us handle the panels throughout the course of the treatment. Here we are bringing the panels into the storage bay. And here the panels are getting stacked up into the storage area, which is also the curing bay, which is a small vented room where panels are placed immediately after they receive their new backing, and you'll see more of that in a little bit. Besides the curing bay, the workshop also has what we call a dirty room with a heavy-duty vacuum extraction system. In the large open area of the workshop, all of the work tables and easels are on wheels so that the room can quickly be arranged for any specific task at hand. A major aspect of any art conservation project is documentation, both written and photographic, to maintain a record of condition of the treatment steps that were used on the material so that future conservators will know what was done. Among the first custom equipment to make was the photography setup, so as to be able to take consistent before and after treatment shots of the panels. And this was necessary to make because none of the adjustable easels that we researched could support the heavy weight of the crated panels, which weighed about 200 pounds. And in addition, we needed the easel to accommodate a consistent photography background. So here's the easel from the front and from the back. And of course, the entire assembly is on wheels, so we can move it around and more easily load panels on and off of it. Now I'll walk you through the sequence of conservation treatment steps that we took to get from this to this. I'm going to move pretty quickly through all of the conservation steps just to give an overview of what took place on the Mosaic, both the treatment steps that show, the ones on the front, and the ones that don't on the back. Throughout the 4+ years of treatment, we had multiple stages of treatments on different panels happening at once, and it was all ably orchestrated by Andy. The first step in the conservation treatment is to heal the face of the mosaic, replacing losses and stabilizing loose areas. This involved replacing and fitting missing tesserae, securing loose tesserae, and readjusting tesserae that were out of position or incorrectly placed. This image shows panel 28 before treatment. Both lower corners required considerable work to reset or replace both glass and marble tesserae. Here, loose and incorrectly placed tiles are being removed, cleaned, and repositioned, and missing tesserae are being replaced. To better do this work, we used photographs taken in 1997 when less tesserae had fallen to help determine the appearance of specific losses, as sometimes it wasn't clear from the mosaic itself whether a certain piece should be smalty or dalle de verre, or exactly what shade it should be. And these photos helped a lot in making those decisions. Cutting of new glass pieces, when there was a loss, was done to accommodate the shape of the original footprint in the epoxy bed. This is a sequence of steps involved in making repairs to the face. Here, Andy's preparing to readhere a marble tessera that was loose, and especially cutting the new pieces and making decisions as to color and choice of material required really sensitive decisions and also a lot of skill in cutting and fitting the pieces. Here, Andy is applying the adhesive and tacking the tessera in position. And this is the setup for cutting new glass pieces of tessera to fit losses. After much experimenting and practice, Andy came up with this glass cutting system that faithfully duplicates the look of the original cut of the original tesserae. When necessary, a new tessera could be fitted further to fit that footprint in the epoxy, could be fitted further by trimming with the glass cutter. For original tesserae that were simply loose, they were carefully cleaned and then tacked into position. After all the repairs were made to the front, then any spaces around the glass or marble where there was missing epoxy mortar were filled with a fine sand that was of similar color to the original epoxy. This is an important step prior to application of the gelatin facing, which you're about to see, as the sand will keep the gelatin facing at the same level of the original epoxy mortar and will keep the facing from oozing down and around the new pieces of glass. Here we see the lower left corner of panel 27 before treatment on the left and on the right after repairs to the design. For several of the panels, the particle board backing was so deteriorated that repairs couldn't be done on the front until the unstable substrate was temporarily secured. Panel 53 was one of these panels. Here we see a degraded edge on the panel with the wood completely rotten, no longer supporting the face of the mosaic. So for this panel, the most rotten areas were removed, and the face of the mosaic was temporarily supported with pieces of wood glued into position. These temporary edges provided enough support to enable repairs to the design on the front. And here's a short sequence showing the repairs that happen on the front, and the arrow is pointing to the temporary wood support. So filling in the losses and making that area whole again. A part of repairing the mosaic design on each panel was to make 8 bolt head covers. Every panel has 8 original points of attachment to the support frame on the Ulrich Museum wall, as shown in this diagram. You can see the 8 points of attachment. And after the panels are installed, there will be 8 bolts going through the panels and 1 central support bolt, which I'll talk about in a moment. Each of these bolts has a cover made for them, whether of marble or glass, depending on where that bolt is in the design. And here we show a bolt cover that has been made for this specific hole. And that's why some people notice that there are gaps here and there in the mosaic, and that's because they still have to have their bolt cover put on. And here is the bolt cover in position. So for every panel, we make 8 bolt head covers times 80, so that's 640 bolt head covers specific to each section on the panel. And each one is packaged and labeled as to the panel it belongs to and where it belongs on the panel. So we've got top left, left center, bottom left. And after the mosaic is installed, a little dab of caulk will be used to adhere the bolt cover in position. And they can easily be located. If a panel ever needs to come down in the future, you can pull that off and then unscrew the bolts. Now the treatment enters the back end of the work, what most people will never see, but which is essential for preserving the mosaic for the long term. In the steps that follow, the old particle board backing is removed and a new backing panel is put on. This aspect of the treatment was designed to give structure and physical integrity to the mosaic panels from the back with minimal change to the front. In order to protect the face of the mosaic during these steps, we first apply a protective facing material that will cushion the tesserae and also hold them securely in their original position during all the manipulation that's going to take place on the back. Developed and tested in the pilot study, the gelatin recipe is mixed and carefully heated in a double boiler. Here, Justin is stirring the gelatin using a rotary mixer on a slow-speed, powerful drill. The double boiler was fabricated for us by our local fabricator, Barry Crawford, as there was nothing ready-made to use for this purpose. Barry was a major part of the treatment through every step, really, in helping design and fabricate materials and tools for us to use throughout the project. And great care has to be exercised in mixing the gelatin, because if you get it too hot, then it loses its strength. And so it's a fine art to mix it. Here, Andy and Justin are pouring the gelatin on the face of a panel. The facing is poured in 2 halves simply for the logistics of managing this huge amount of hot and heavy gelatin. The thickness of the gelatin above the tops of the tesserae generally ranged from about 5/8 to 3/4 of an inch, providing lots of cushioning for the glass and the marble. Back in the pilot study, we had tested to see whether there is any potential for the gelatin to stain the marble tesserae. And we felt that there was some chance of it, so we didn't want to risk having gelatin in contact with the marble for a long time. So before applying the facing on the marble, we first applied a protective barrier of parafilm M over the marble. This material stretches and conforms to intricate shapes, which allowed it to faithfully follow the conformation of the marble tesserae, allowing the gelatin to be able to surround the tesserae enough to grab them and hold them securely in position. And the parafilm had to be put on probably about 50% of the surface of the mosaic, because there's about 50% marble and 50% glass. Here are two details of the parafilm M in position on areas of marble tesserae. And this image shows a panel with half of the facing poured and the parafilm layer in place on the other half, ready to receive the gelatin. For all these next treatment steps now, the panels are lying face down, the glass and marble tesserae protected by the thick gelatin facing. Steel angle iron rails here are bolted around the panel to lock it in place, and the height of the rails reaches to the back of the particle board. Almost. After removing the aluminum bushings and the epoxy surrounding the bushings, the back of the panel is scored with a rotary blade skill saw. Following guides on a tabletop, a series of cuts 3/4 inches deep is made across the width of the board. And here you can see deteriorated particle board. It's swelling and has very little cohesion. The bulk of the backing is removed by chiseling. And then next, the remnants of particle board are removed with a rotary tool with a disc designed to remove wood. The wood remnants are removed just down to the epoxy mortar. After that, using a diamond grinding wheel designed for epoxy, the epoxy is removed as much as possible, stopping just at the backs of the tesserae. And an outline of the shapes of the glass tesserae begins to be revealed as the epoxy layer gets thinner and thinner. The epoxy is further removed with hand tools, stainless blades and scalpels, to further reveal the backs of the tesserae. And this aspect of the work required seemingly endless, extremely patient and meticulous work to get all the way down to the glass. During removal of the epoxy, we found that the epoxy was generally not adhered to the glass, and the tesserae appeared to mostly be held in place by virtue of being locked in position with each other. This picture also shows a major aspect of the conservation treatment, and that is that we left the original epoxy in between the tesserae. It's not serving any function except for being there, and it's very important that it's there because its presence that way doesn't change the appearance from the front. We were able to leave a great deal of epoxy. There were some places, and I'll show you where that wasn't possible, but the great percentage of original epoxy in between tesserae was left. Here's a detail of a field of green smalty and dalle de verre showing the backs of the tesserae exposed. And again, you can see the original epoxy, which we left in between them. A Dremel tool was used to reduce extra high ridges of old epoxy on the back between tesserae that could be a problem with applying the new backing. Sometimes during the backing removal, we encountered areas where the epoxy was so degraded that it completely dislodged during the backing removal, and it no longer held the tesserae in position. These were areas that appeared to have been wet for long periods of time. And this was generally a problem within large fields of marble tesserae, although it did occur in fields of glass as well, a little bit. This problem was not encountered in the pilot study, but it was found on a number of panels. Justin developed a very successful way to deal with these areas. In these fragile areas, because there was essentially nothing holding the tesserae in position, we had to remove them and clean them individually, then clean their bedding area of debris, and then reposition them in their original placement using the footprint in the parafilm and gelatin layers as a guide. The tesserae were then locked into place with mosaic netting secured with dabs of the same material that we used to attach the new backing panels. And here's a view of the back of panel 21, showing 3 of these unstable areas now firmly secured with the mosaic netting and the little dabs of adhesive. Now this panel's ready for the next phase of treatment. The final step before applying a new backing panel is, again, to fill any gaps or losses of old epoxy with fine sand of similar color to the original epoxy. The purpose of partially filling these voids with sand is that so when the adhesive for the new panel is pushed onto the back of the tesserae, it won't ooze up around to the front of the tesserae. Instead, it will stop at the sand level. And in fact, it will incorporate a layer of sand at the surface so that the adhesive is going to look like the original epoxy mortar. And this will make any potentially visible adhesive on the front resemble the mortar, and also having the sand in place will help it to not attract dirt as, when it's back on the wall of the museum. So these repaired areas are also places, all these areas are going to receive the sand application in between the tesserae. And here, Kaylin and Katrina on the left and Andy's hands on the right are adding sand to the voids in between the tesserae. And now the mosaic is ready to receive its new backing. Here is the back of panel 27, which required a lot of stabilization with the netting. And here's panel 53, ready for its new backing. The next step is to apply the new perforated stainless steel backing panel to the mosaic design. After extensive research, consultation, and testing in the pilot study phase, we selected a Dow Corning structural caulk, Dow Corning 756, as the material to adhere the mosaic design to the new backing panels. This material has an excellent track record in the building trade, from holding plate glass in high-rise buildings on the Florida coast to holding atrium glass together in Denver. The material is highly flexible and is compatible with all of the components making up the mosaic mural, that is, glass, marble, and steel. The new support panels are made of 301 perforated stainless steel with stainless steel hat channel bracing. The panels were designed and fabricated by Barry Crawford. These materials are compatible with the mounting system of the mosaic as well as the chosen adhesive. In preparation for the new backing panel application, new rails, again, are set around the panel, and they're shimmed if necessary to ensure the proper depth of the Dow Corning 756 adhesive material. The back of the mosaic is carefully cleaned and degreased with acetone, as is the new stainless steel panel. Now, this operation has to proceed quickly, As the working life for the Dow Corning 756 is relatively short, it's dependent on humidity, and its pot life is 15 to 20 minutes. Over the course of the project, Andy and Justin choreographed this procedure to a fine art, usually to Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, or Leonard Cohen's The Future was also very successful background music to make this work. I'm sorry I don't have the music to play now, but I'll quickly run through the slides to give you a sense of the procedure. The Dow Corning 756, it's a heavy viscous material. It's first spread out with trowels, and then it's screeded across the rails to bring it to a uniform surface level. When the Dow Corning 756 is at the proper level, the panel is ready to receive the new back. Application of the new backing panel is always done on this table, which has been fitted with a mechanism to hold a custom screw press clamping device, which is another piece of equipment fabricated by Barry Crawford and designed with discussions with Andy and Bob. The new stainless steel panel is set onto the back of the Mosaic and carefully placed into position within the steel rails. Then the custom screw press is quickly installed around the panel into the square receiving tubes that slide out from below the tabletop. Two additional temporary sections of C-channel are added to allow pressure to be applied more evenly across the panel. Then the clamps are screwed down in succession with these movable handles to apply even pressure across the panel. The screw press assembly has 20 points of contact that are tightened down in succession to the proper pressure, allowing the Dow Corning 756 to ooze up through the perforated stainless steel backing panel, which ensures good contact with the panel and also provides a keying function as well. Here, Andy is checking for an even pressure overall, making final adjustments, and the panel is wheeled into the curing bay where it will cure for about 3 weeks before any further work is done on this panel. After about 24 hours, the screw press can be removed. That concludes the back end part of the project, or the behind the scenes part that most people will never see, but which gives the structural stability back to the Mosaic. The next steps take place on the front again, and they involve removal of the gelatin facing and cleaning the glass and marble tesserae. The bulk of the facing is removed by gravity, suspending the Mosaic panel at a downward angle and then gently working the gelatin facing off of the front. This next step is more time-consuming. When the facing is removed, small fragments of gelatin hang up between the tight little crevices between the tesserae. And this was on the glass only. Fortunately, with the parafilm, this was not a problem on the marble tesserae. Here are some more little pieces of gelatin fragments that stay behind. Any material would have done this. In fact, you want the gelatin to rip, because if you had a material that was really, really strong, you might damage the glass when you were pulling the facing off. Removing these fragments was done by simple mechanical methods, carefully using scalpels and dental tools to pick the little pieces of gelatin out from between the tesserae. Gelatin removal turned out to be many of our staff members' favorite task, the job turning into a lively gelatin bee. And here you can see a pile of gelatin fragments. So everybody would accumulate that. The final step of gelatin removal was to use a jeweler's or dental cleaner to melt and blow out the smallest residues. This was possible because the gelatin is water-soluble, another reason for choosing it as the facing material. We knew we would be able to get every last bit out from the mosaic. The steamer provides water and heat without really saturating the mosaic panels. And also the steaming process was a general cleaning for the glass. With all traces of gelatin facing removed, the last treatment step on the face of the panels was the final cleaning of the tesserae, removing the haze on the glass and reducing the ingrained dirt on the marble were the goals of cleaning. Although cleaning tests had been done in the pilot study, further testing was carried out, extensive testing was carried out to find more effective, safe, and relatively quick methods. A number of cleaning experiments were done, including chemical cleaning, air abrasive, with testing done by a professional microblasting company that actually did cleaning and testing for the Getty Conservation Institute when they were cleaning a famous medieval mosaic. But unfortunately, their techniques were not applicable to the WSU mosaic. We also tried ultrasonic cleaning, laser cleaning, and various other forms of mechanical cleaning. In the end, the most thorough and safe method was to use very fine fiberglass bristle brushes. Everyone who worked on this phase of the treatment was trained using a stereo microscope so that they clearly understood the physical effects of the brush and how best to apply them on the mosaic. This image shows an area of hazy glass tesserae being cleaned. The fiberglass brushes are visible here. And in this black field, the area left of center has not yet been cleaned. In this sequence, we're focusing on two tesserae within a black design field during various stages of cleaning with the fiberglass brush. As cleaning progresses, you can see that the tesserae change from hazy gray to lustrous black, and outdoors in the sun, the vibrancy of the color fields, even the black areas, is restored. Every tessera on the mosaic was cleaned like this, every glass tessera. And here's another detail showing an area, one tessera being cleaned and showing the difference in appearance between the cleaned and uncleaned areas. The heavy crusts on the deteriorated yellow field of panels 62 and 67 proved extremely tenacious. These heavy crusts are actually the deterioration product of the glass itself. And the safest way to remove these crusts was through the use of scalpels, often working under magnification. The marble tesserae were cleaned as much as possible using a small dental steamer. This removed the surface dirt, the mold, and a lot of the ingrained dirt, but there were areas where we could not safely remove all of the ingrained dirt. We tried clay poultices as well, but in the end we felt it was safer just to leave a bit of history behind. Even so, the overall effect of cleaning the marble was dramatic. A final detail in the overall conservation treatment was to drill 8 mounting holes in the backs of the new stainless panels, matching them up with the original mounting holes through the mosaic itself. These new holes, however, are not round, but they're oblong. So they're going to act as slots that will allow for expansion and contraction of the panels when the mural is back outdoors on the Ulrich. And stainless steel numbers were also riveted to the back of each panel to permanently identify it. Finally, at the end of August of this year, the last panels were crated up, ready for their trip back to Wichita. The big day was August 31, 2016, and here we see the two Bobs, Bob Workman and Bob Marti, and Andy Breidenbach loading panels on a hot and humid afternoon for the journey home, bringing us to the final leg of this journey, getting the panels back on the south wall of the Ulrich Museum. Throughout the conservation treatment, Bob Marti, Andy, and Barry Crawford held a number of discussions with each other about how best to ensure a successful installation. The old painted steel framework was removed, and a new framework of galvanized steel was installed. The new framework is of similar design as the original, with slight modifications to more easily accommodate the panels. As mentioned earlier, the original mounting system for the panels consisted of 8 points of attachment. These same attachment locations were used again, but this time, the new installation also includes a central 5/16" diameter anchor stud in the middle, with the 8 older attachments acting as supplemental support. Barry Crawford fabricated a template to locate and drill the hole for the central anchor stud on each mosaic panel. And here the template is mounted on the back of a panel, ready for drilling. The template includes a guide to help keep the drill perfectly straight. And these are 2 of the central anchor studs. They're designed to be screwed into the framework on the wall, then broken off at the groove here. The panels will then be hung on the anchor stud. Our fabricator also made a template for drilling all of the holes in the framework on the wall, including 8 holes for the 6mm bolts and 1 hole for the central 5/16" anchor stud. In use, the template is clamped to the framework, which allows for accurate drilling of all of the holes in the frame. After drilling, each hole is tapped so that it can receive the threaded bolts. This is the assembly for the central anchoring stud, including a spacer or shim, and the bolt to hold the spacer in position, and then the 5/16" central anchor bolt. Every panel has a unique set of shims for each of the 9 attachment points to ensure that the panels sit perfectly flat on the framework. The flatness, besides being important from a visual aspect, is necessary to allow for expansion and contraction of the framework and of the panels without having any distortion to the panels. The shims are adhered to the framework so that should a panel ever need to come down in the future, the right shims will be there when it has to go back up. Here we see 3 views of the central anchor stud and shims ready to receive a panel. The central stud has been broken off at the groove, and again, the bolt head was there simply to get it screwed into the framework. Then a panel here is being mounted on the lift, ready to bring it up into position on the wall. On the floor of the lift, we have an adjustable platform with movable extensions to allow for very accurate positioning of each panel as it is transferred from the lift to the framework. Each panel is first hung on its central 5/16" anchor stud, and then the 8 original holes are aligned, and 6mm flange head bolts with plastic washers are inserted and tightened down to a pressure of 8 pounds using a torque wrench. And now for some artistic views of the installation process. And there's a lot of beautiful images on Instagram. I suggest people look at that as well. This entire project has been an awesome, exhilarating, and humbling experience for us. It has been our greatest honor to be entrusted with the care of this work, which in the words of Miro himself is one of the best mosaics ever made. We have striven to do justice to this great work of art, to the artist, and to the community in which it resides. And our goal is, for doing this, is so that Personnages Oiseaux can continue to delight and inspire for decades to come. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions if anybody has any.
Why didn't you consider using the film over the glass as well as the marble? It would have saved you a lot of,
That's a good question, but actually the glass was so unstable that it had to be held very, very tightly. It needed that extra anchoring, that having the gelatin going all the way down to the bottom of the epoxy gave it. It was so unadhered to the epoxy that if we didn't have it locked in place really firmly with that gelatin, it could have been a disaster when we took the back panel off. As it was, in most places, the marble tesserae were pretty well adhered to the epoxy, and they just didn't need quite as much anchoring as the glass ones did. So we were fortunate that the marble tesserae were sort of strong enough that, or that their adherence to the adhesion to the epoxy was strong enough that they weren't going to fly all over when we took the backing off, except in those few cases you saw, and then those had to be repaired. But we might have had to do, if we didn't have the glass held really, really firmly, we might have had to do those sorts of repairs all over, had we not had the glass held that firmly. I hope that sort of makes sense. It's a bit hard to explain. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We're discussing that with ongoing maintenance, yes. We'll have to see how quickly it gets dirty, but we're discussing that with the Ulrich about a plan for not letting it get as hazy and dirty as it had before. I know, yeah. And that, I think we're going to have to just experiment a little and see how it ages and how much can be done each year to keep it in really good condition. The problem is there's no fast way to clean it because of the difference in surface levels. There's no way you can clean more than one tessera at a time. And so that's something we're going to be looking into over the next few years to see how best we can keep it in really good condition without too much monumental intervention. Yeah.
Where do you get the replacement pieces, tessera?
Yeah, that was a big part of the project, and I didn't include it for time reasons, but we did a lot of research, and we got a lot of glass we got from, well, some we were able to get from Atelier Loire, actually. They still had some stock from when they made the mosaic, and so we would send samples of what we needed, and they would send examples back, and then they'd ship the glass to us. It finally got to the point where they really didn't have anything we needed anymore. So we had to go to other sources. We had several special orders of mosaic glass made for us by Mosaici Donat, which is the other big mosaic glass company in Venice. And in order to do that, we worked through their American representative. And so he negotiated getting that done. And nowadays, mosaic glass is a lot thinner than what you can get now. So we had to have special runs made to get the thick 15 millimeter glass. And we had to special order glass to finish the bright yellow fields. That was special order, and then a lot of the other colors were. And one of the colors we had a really hard time finding was one of the deep blue colors in the dalle de verre, and that's just a slab glass. It's like pouring glass in a baking pan, basically, and in sort of a rectangular baking pan. And of all places, we found a company in West Virginia, Blenko Glass, that I'd call them and say, "Oh yeah, we do doll," and they sent us some examples of their colors, and one of them matched exactly what we needed, and it was pretty inexpensive too, and so that solved that big problem because there was a lot of losses of this particular blue color. So that came from stateside. Yeah. Yes. I think it will hold, because one of the parts about this treatment is, one reason the panels fell apart was because of the dissimilar materials, and obviously we couldn't get rid of the steel framework on the wall. There's not really a better way to attach the mosaic. And of course we can't get rid of the glass and marble. That's the art. And so the Dow Corning 756 is actually the material that bridges all the materials together. We're using the steel framework, the steel panels, because they're compatible with the steel framework on the wall. So they're going to move at about the same rate, without distortion, without breaking, without stresses that are going to cause something to fall apart. And this adhesive is very, very flexible, and also very tenacious. So it's going to hold all those parts together, and that's what's going to move is the adhesive, but it will move without causing nothing else is going to give. So yes, I think it'll work well as long as the wall holds up. Then it should work well in seismic activity. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, one more quote. Yeah. So, well, thank you very much. Yeah.
We will be doing all our formal thanking of all our donors in 2 weeks, but I do want to mention, because it speaks a great deal to the importance of this project, we received over the 4 years $630,000 in federal grants towards this conservation project. $450,000 came in as 3 Institute of Museum and Library Service conservation awards. We have been kind of a star project of IMLS throughout this activity, and so not only is this important for us here in Wichita, this project sets the conservation field forward substantially, and so the project will now have a second life through the dissemination of all this information within the conservation field itself. So we're really honored that it's been able to move things forward, and hopefully no one will ever do this again the way it was originally done. I do want to encourage you all to mark October 30th on your calendars. The afternoon, 2 to 5, we will have a public celebration welcoming the mural back. We're not going to do anything grand like an unveiling again. It's obvious that it's there, and we want to enjoy it while it's going up. So, but we will have great music and food and lots of fun activities. And between now and then, Marianne and Kayland are on campus cleaning bronzes in the outdoor sculpture collection, and I'm sure they would enjoy chatting with you if you see them on campus. And Bob and Andy and Justin continue daily to get the remaining 19 panels up. So thank you all for your interest. This is a really gratifying point that we're at. The end is near, and time to uncork the bottle. So thank you, and we will see you later in the month.